Now, I had the honor and privilege of attending the premiere of his new film, Jekyll Island, in North Hollywood at the Laemmle Theaters this week, and I have to say it's one of the most informative exposés to be ever made on the Federal Reserve System, basically revealing the grand larceny scheme, the annual robbery that the American people continue to endure via this kleptocracy, which is hell-bent on making us believe that fractional reserve banking and lending will fix the problems it's created. Now, the film also exposes some of the dynastic elite banking families, such as the Rothschilds and the Rockefellers, among other influential families that make up this creature with so many arms that we call the Fed. Ladies and gentlemen, at this time, I'd like you to please welcome my guest, Libertarian presidential candidate, author, and award-winning documentary filmmaker, Mr. Bill Still, to the program. Hello, Bill. Thank you for being on today.
Oh, it's such an honor to be on. Thank you very much, and thank you for coming to the premiere.
Thank you, Bill, for having us. It was great to be there, and I have to say it was probably one of the best exposés I have ever seen on the Federal Reserve to this date. Now, Bill, let's get right into the interview now. You were one of 4 libertarians running for the presidential nomination in 2012, and that's before Gary Johnson decided to join the race. You were pretty much one of the only instantly recognizable figures among those candidates, like I believe it was Carl Pearson and R.J. Harris. By now, you're probably aware that the former New Mexico governor amassed over 1 million votes in his campaign for presidency, the most votes ever for a libertarian candidate. Now, what are your thoughts regarding that presidential race, and can you share some of the pros and cons regarding the Johnson campaign? It's my understanding he borrowed quite a bit of money, right?
Yeah, he came into the race with about $100,000 debt, and as the last time I checked, he still owes over $200,000. So
wow.
It's remarkable to me that a libertarian candidate would come in to the race with a huge debt because he was a Republican candidate, and basically he was expecting libertarians then to pay off his debt. And so not only didn't he pay off the debt, but he doubled it. So it was a pretty disgraceful performance. And this is a guy who promised to get 5% of the vote, and yet did effectively no better than any other libertarian candidate, getting just slightly over 1% of the vote.
Right. Wow. Now, how do you feel you ran your campaign? I mean, what are some high points you can say from achieving such a monumental, nomination for the party?
Well, I typically ran second in every state in which I competed against Johnson. Johnson spent tons of money because he had a Republican hitman, that's what he calls himself, Roger Stone, behind him. So it was definitely a Republican attempt to take over the Libertarian Party. And neither Stone, who now wants to run as a Libertarian candidate for governor of Florida, or Johnson, who has proclaimed that he's going to continually run as the Libertarian presidential party candidate, neither one is going away. So to me, it's nothing but a Republican takeover of the LP, and that's just not a good thing.
Right, absolutely right. Now, Mr. Still, tell our listening audience about one of your very first publications titled The New World Order, The Ancient Plan of Secret Societies.
Well, that was something that I wrote. It was published in 1990 and sold very well, sold 250,000 copies, and really launched me on the whole thing. It was the first book on the New World Order. I entitled that in a generation at least. And
right.
So it kind of set me up for what I'm doing right now, and I think I'm actually going to republish it because it was much more conspiracy laden. I've let it fall out of publication just because I didn't want it to damage the credibility of my work with monetary reform. But I think I'm going to republish it now.
I definitely think you should. I looked into the book, and it's simply amazing. Almost all your work actually is amazing. Mr. Still, speaking of secret societies, are you aware that many U.S. presidents have encountered UFO phenomenon, from George Washington to the days of Truman and Eisenhower, even Carter and Reagan? Now, my question is, could the governments of the world be influenced by the first secret society, dating back to ancient Sumerian times, such as the Brotherhood of the Snake?
I have no idea about that. You can really get into some very strange things, but a lot of it is hypothesis at this point. It's very difficult to get beyond 500 or 600 years ago, because there really isn't a written historical record.
That's
so
right.
When you go back to oral tradition, then it's difficult to produce credible material.
Right. What are some of the secret societies you covered in your first publication?
Well, kind of the low entrance level, especially in the United States, is Freemasonry. But
right.
I'd really prefer not to focus this interview on that work. I'm just not ready to do that yet. I'm still focusing strictly on monetary reform.
Absolutely, and you're a great champion at that as well. Now, Bill, tell us about your days as a publisher and editor for the London Monitor, I believe, in 1977. You also worked for USA Today, Los Angeles Times Syndicate, and Omni Magazine, as well as many other great and stellar newspapers. Tell us about that.
Well, I never worked actually on staff for any of them. I just sold stories to them.
Okay.
The Loudon Monitor I was managing editor of that for 5 years, which is just a small county weekly newspaper in Northern Virginia. Interestingly enough, Loudon County is now, for the second straight year, the richest county in the United States as far as per capita income. So It became a bedroom community for the Washington, D.C. metro area, and everybody there has a job and has a good job.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Mr. Still, I want to ask you about some of your hobbies. I personally love boxing. I've trained with actually the father of a top-ranked American heavyweight here in California. But can you tell us about some of your favorite hobbies, like Vietnamese Taekwondo, for instance?
Yeah, I started, when did I start that? Maybe about 1980, and worked my way up to where I'm a fourth-degree black belt.
Wow.
Although I don't practice anymore, but the way I keep fit primarily is through tennis. I play competitive USTA tennis, and it keeps me going. I'm 65 now, and I can still walk around and run around, and plan on doing so, and being a pain in the butt to the folks who control the debt money system for several more decades.
Absolutely. You're kneeing them in the face with your high knees, like they do in Taekwondo, I believe, right?
I'd prefer to see it more as exposing their weaknesses to a very broad swath of not only the U.S. population but the world population now. It's very interesting. I can just tell from my email traffic, my YouTube and Facebook traffic, that this is really growing internationally. Internationally, it's kind of like the 20, 30 something generation is really catching on to this. I just did a radio interview in Japan.
Wow.
About a month ago, and the guy was 28, and he was an Englishman. He had a British accent, and he said that in Tokyo, the 20-somethings that he hung out with, all they wanted to talk about was monetary reform. It's like, what? Really? it is the topic du jour, and I've predicted for a number of years that the way this is going to go down is there's going to be a tipping point come. A tipping point in politics has a particular meaning where it looks like nothing's happening, and then all of a sudden critical mass of numbers of people become aware of what the problem is, and suddenly it just all changes overnight. and suddenly people say, "Oh, we knew that all along." And I think that's the way this is going to go down, because nothing less is at stake than the capability of humankind to self-govern. That's what's on the line here, and along with it, possibly even the ability of humankind to continue on into the future.
Wow, you're absolutely right, and that's something we're going to get into monetary reform in just a little bit. But I want my listening audience to get to know you. But Mr. Still, tell us about your days working with Ross Perot. A lot of what he warned about has actually happened already. Tell us about those times working with Ross Perot's Reform Party.
Yeah, well, I was 10th district coordinator and really edited the state newsletter for the Perot forces, which later became the Reform Party. And I met Ross, and he's a little teeny guy, but he's a firebrand, and he was way ahead of his time and unafraid to speak his mind until that one time that he dropped out of the race suddenly. He, of course, Perot's a very private guy. He would, even those of us close to the campaign didn't know exactly what was afoot, but we all speculated that it was because of some sort of a threat to his family that he decided his family was more important than his presidential aspirations.
Right. And that has happened. That could very well happen to any third-party candidate. That's something that's very real. Now, Mr. Still, tell our listening audience a little bit about your background. I believe you come from an Air Force family, and you were raised in Los Angeles, right? You were born in Ohio?
Yeah, I was born in Ohio, raised, started high school in Torrance, California, went to North Torrance High. My dad then retired from the Air Force. He was a tech kind of guy, a scientist kind of guy. He was the chief scientist for the Minuteman missile system. He was the one that delivered the program in 3 years and under budget, probably the last defense program that was ever brought in under budget. And he retired and went to work on a government contract in the Washington, D.C. area. And so there, our family moved there when I was 15. And so I spent most of my life in Northern Virginia, and now doing all these monetary reform documentaries. I'm kind of, people now ask me where I live, and I kind of stutter because I'm not sure exactly where I live at this point. I live on the road.
Right.
Right now, I'm actually responsible for filming the public banking conference at Dominican University in Northern California, or just north of San Francisco, which starts in about an hour. Right. And so I got here a little bit early, and I set all up and told them that I was going to be doing your radio show, and so they see me walking around talking, and that was what was up.
Well, it's great to have you on. I couldn't have a better guest on than you today. Obviously, I mean, after inviting me to the premiere, it was an epic premiere. Now, I have to ask. G. Edward Griffin was a guest on my program, and there was one thing we disagreed on, and that was the possibility that the international bankers could have killed a couple of presidents, in particular Kennedy, for his stance on silver currency via his executive order 11110. The Fed is also believed to have a part in killing 4 other presidents, like I stated, Kennedy, Lincoln, Garfield, McKinley, and as you know, even attempting to kill Andrew Jackson. What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, the other 4 that you mentioned were all, there's good evidence that they're the assassinations of those presidents and the attempted assassination of Jackson were the responsibility of international banking interests. However, when we were first doing the research on the money masters, that was before the internet, and so all that research was very hard won. We had to spend days in the Library of Congress, which wasn't that difficult for me because I lived only about an hour from it. But for other people, it would be really difficult. And, have you ever read Executive Order 1110? It's not very long, and if you would read it, you'd see the fallacy. It has nothing to do discusses nothing about the implementation of U.S. notes back into the money supply, discusses nothing about killing off the debt money system or anything like that. It merely discusses transferring the authority to reissue silver certificates from the President to the Secretary of the Treasury. Has nothing to do with the big picture at all. Silver certificates, they were about to kill off silver certificates altogether, merely because the price of silver had risen above $1. And so there was an arbitrage thing going on where people could buy silver certificate dollars and then trade them in and get more silver than more dollars worth of silver. So they had to kill that off. And so in order to facilitate this move, they had to transfer authority to the Secretary of the Treasury, and that's all Kennedy was doing. We looked at this in depth. There was also a story that Kennedy gave a speech at Columbia University, I believe, outlining his plan to reissue U.S. notes and kill the Fed. We checked with Columbia. He wasn't there that day. The speech didn't exist. We checked with the White House. Kennedy was in the White House. I wanted this to be true. Right. I wanted to include it in the Money Masters. I mean, it just makes perfect sense in the flow of things. It just wasn't true.
Wow. Unbelievable. What do you say about the recent claims that state that he was a Third Reich sympathizer as well? I mean, I kind of thought that they were cherry picking it a bit, but I mean, like you just said, and G. Edward Griffin before you told me, there's really no evidence that he was against the central bankers.
No, quite to the contrary. He gave a speech at the New York Economic Club that year, and if you read that speech, I mean, he was all about internationalism. There was no hint of trying to maintain a U.S. national sovereignty, which is, of course, the core of anybody who wants to. You have to believe that if you're going to oppose the international debt-based monetary system.
Unbelievable, Mr. Still. Moving on here, I thought that the only thing that you could synchronize to The Secret of Oz was The Dark Side of the Moon, the album by Pink Floyd. Apparently, I was wrong. You also were able to bring out a lot of similarities between The Wizard of Oz and the Federal Reserve System. Now, let's talk about your film, The Secret of Oz.
Well, yeah, that's The Wizard of Oz. The original book version was written by L. Frank Baum in 1900, and you have to set the stage a little bit to understand why he would do such a thing. And that is, Baum was pretty much a failed writer at that point, but he was a fan of William Jennings Bryan during his 1896 presidential run, and in fact, his children, one of his children, stated that he marched frequently in some of William Jennings Bryan's torchlight parades. And so, so in any case, he was a fan, and when Bryan lost the 1896 election, monetary reform took a severe blow at that point. And people in that day were much more aware of what was going on than they are today.
Right.
Today, the Fed has spent so much money throwing mud into the water, throwing fog into the air, that it's very confusing for people. And so that's why I try to hammer time and time again what's going on.
Right. And the Fed does have a lot of influence. I remember hearing in your film, Jekyll Island, you spoke of tenure, right?
Yeah, that's the problem right now is not that the truth isn't out there. I've certainly done my share of that. The problem is that there's so much confusion in the air, and so I'm sorry, I forgot the question. This is a chaotic situation. I'm trying to do this interview.
No problem. I mean, we were talking about your wonderful film, has received so many accolades. I mean, it won Best Documentary Award of the Year at 2010's Beloit International Festival, and the Silver Sierra Award in Yosemite, where I escaped near death. I was almost mauled by a bear out there. Anyway, Best Excellence in Filmmaking in Yosemite. And you also won an award for your film at the Nevada Film Festival. Again, we're talking about The Secret of Oz, your film.
Yeah, well, in any case, so Baum was part of the William Jennings Bryan cadre.
Right.
And so after Bryan lost the election, Baum decided to write in 1900 the Wizard of Oz and put into it monetary symbolism. Like all writers who are trying to get their first big hit, you use what you know, and
Exactly.
so you throw in everything in the kitchen sink. And so he devised this monetary symbolism of the silver slippers on the yellow brick road,
Right.
Because Bryan's mantra at that point was silver. To add silver as a complementary currency to the gold-only money that had starved the United States for 30 years in the post-Civil War period. And so in the original book version, Dorothy's slippers were not ruby. Dorothy's slippers were silver, and to provide the symbolism. And wearing the silver slippers, then the group could march along the dangerous yellow brick road. The yellow brick road was dangerous in the book version, and thereby get to the emerald green city, symbolizing the real thing that needed to be accomplished, and that was debt-free government-issued money, which Lincoln made, and they were called greenbacks, and that's why the Emerald City. And so Baum threw in all this symbolism, and it worked well. His book became a big hit, and so shortly thereafter, he started denying any affiliation with monetary symbolism. He just decided he was going to take the money and run, and he wrote many other books, a whole series of Oz books. They were wildly popular. There was a traveling stage show, and Baum became very wealthy and just decided it was best to distance himself from any of that, the political aspect of the book. And of course, when they made the movie, Technicolor was a new process, and I think the producers very innocently, not part of some conspiracy, decided to change Dorothy's slippers to ruby because it showed up prettier on Technicolor, and thereby, the main symbols became obscure, clouded, and so that's why it was lost. I know when I was a kid, we used to watch The Wizard of Oz. It would come on once a year. I forget whether it was Easter or whatever. And I just, after the first couple of times, I never liked watching it because I just had the feeling that there was some symbolism going on behind it that I couldn't understand. And sure enough, that was exactly the case.
Wow. Yeah, I mean, I used to like watching it while listening to Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, but now I'm definitely going to be giving it, a couple of looks here and there just to try to catch that symbolism. Now, Mr. Still, let's cover your 1995 smash hit and one of the most watched internet films in the history of the internet. That's Money Masters. What are some of the fondest moments you have in the creation of this film and the information you wish to convey to the citizenry regarding the abolishment of the IRS and the fact that, well, the 16th Amendment was pretty much never ratified and the banksters are committing grand larceny in large amounts every year? Tell us about your film.
Well, let's see, magic moments from the creation of the Money Masters. I can't pull any to mind right now. It was a long track. I mean, it took me just a couple of weeks to write the script. A gentleman who the first book I published on this topic was called On the Horns of the Duke, the Federal Reserve and the New World Order, and it was not popular and has subsequently fallen out of print. But a guy read the book and called me and said, "Let's do a documentary video," and I said, "Sure, let's go." So I had the script written because I had it all in my brain, and wrote it in 2 weeks. And we were in Europe and filmed there for 2 weeks, and then filmed around the United States for another 6 weeks, and then we spent 3 months editing it in the dead of winter in 2006, and put it out maybe March or April of 2006. And we just couldn't shorten it. It's notoriously lengthy, like 3 hours and 23 minutes, and it's sold slowly, but it kept picking up and picking up and picking up, and year after year it kept picking up and picking up, and then Pirated Copies ended up on the newly formed, I think it was called Google Video. And when they finally shut Google Video down, the Money Masters had 14 million hits.
Wow.
And is perpetually listed in the top 25 watched documentaries of all time on whatever one of those sites that counts those things.
Right.
So it's had a lot more impact. And really, everywhere I go, I was just at a conference yesterday, and just walked into this conference here today, and everybody that sees me, they never start out the conversation with, "Oh, I love The Secret of Oz." They start out with, "The Money Masters was such a groundbreaking video," and blah, blah, blah. And then they'll tell me stuff like, "I've watched it 38 times," and I just look at them like, "Don't you have a life? It's 3 hours and 23 minutes long, for God's sake." But, there was a lot of information to cover, and we packed that information in just as tight as any documentary ever has in history, and that's just the way I work. You've got to take your caffeine before you sit down to one of my films, because it's very dense.
Absolutely, and an unbelievable film. I've probably seen it about 3 times. Not what was it? What the other guy watched it about 40 times? You said, or how many times?
Oh, well, I get people telling me hundreds of times. I mean, stuff I just don't believe, but everybody seems to have seen it multiple times, because you just can't absorb it all the first time.
Right. Yeah, you literally got to have your notebook there. I mean, I took my notebook and I took notes at your premiere. So talking about your premiere, let's talk about your recent blockbuster, that expose you have dubbed Jekyll Island. Tell our listening audience about the secret history of this getaway for the banking elite, and how in 1910 they conspired to create annual robbery by instituting the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, marking 100 years of debased fiat currency, which is plunging our country into an abyss of insurmountable death and doom. Tell us about your film Jekyll Island.
Yeah, I don't like the use of the term fiat currency, just because that implies that it's a non-metallic backed currency.
Right.
Is the problem, when indeed it is not the problem. It doesn't matter what backs your money. All that matters is who controls the quantity. And right now, that quantity is not even controlled by the Federal Reserve, although they do exert some control. But the Fed is just like a curtain in The Wizard of Oz. It's there to fake us out, to think that it's A, part of the government, and B, that it controls the banking system. Well, both of those are false. The Fed is not part of the government. It's listed in the Washington, D.C. Yellow Pages on the same page, the white pages, the business pages, as Federal Express.
Right.
It's not listed in the blue government pages. Frequent federal court cases have come around. One, for example, a Federal Reserve employee was driving a car and got in a car wreck and claimed that he didn't have any liability because the car was a government-owned car. Well, the federal courts looked into this and said, no, the Fed is clearly a corporation. And right now there's a YouTube video out there where a Fed lawyer, is now admitting that, oh yeah, we're a private corporation owned by our member banks. Well, you just can't turn the money supply of a sovereign nation over to a corporation, because corporations, by definition, have to compete with other corporations to get the most profit for their corporation. They don't give a darn about sovereign money created in the public interest. And, the Constitution is very clear about this. The rights granted to Congress are very few. And, in fact, it only takes up 413 words in the Constitution, so it's not very difficult to get through. And therein it says that Congress and only Congress can create money and control the value thereof.
Right.
And controlling the value thereof means controlling the quantity in circulation. And so this is the right of Congress and only Congress, and that was part of President Andrew Jackson's veto speech, one of the greatest speeches in American history, where he says if Congress has the right to print money, that certainly does not have the right to give that right to a corporation. And that's exactly correct. And the way they got this through was a series of booms and busts, which the bankers could completely control because we were on a gold money system, so it was very easy for them to control the quantity of money in the country because the big banks owned the vast majority of the gold. So they created a series of booms and busts throughout the late 1800s and early 1900s, and this culminated in the crash of 1907 when J.P. Morgan and the Rockefeller family conspired to crash the stock market to basically take out one of their chief competitors, the Heinz Group, like Heinz ketchup.
Right.
Because they had a big bank and several other things that they wanted. And then J.P. Morgan, made a pronouncement. He thought the Heinz Bank, the Knickerbocker Trust, was about to go under. And the very next day, all the Knickerbocker Trust depositors rushed the tellers' cages and withdrew their money, and the bank collapsed. And Morgan and Rockefeller were able to seize the assets that they wanted, a big coal company in Tennessee, et cetera, et cetera. However, it got out of their control, like it typically does, and it caused a panic nationwide, a very sharp panic, to where the bankers, because we're on a gold money system, had contracted the currency in the post-Civil War period steadily, so that there was only about $7 per capita in circulation. And when the panic happened, then anybody who had cash money, held on to it, hoarded it. And so then there was even less money in circulation. So Morgan came up with this outrageous plan where he petitioned Congress to allow his banks to create some $250 million worth of cash money, paper money issued by Morgan banks. He just printed it up out of nothing and then spent it into existence, sent it out to his branch banks to be loaned at interest back to us. This is completely, you talk about fiat money, this is the most fiat money of all fiat money. And it worked. It restored confidence in the country, and then Morgan was hailed as a hero. And so, but then we had, fortunately at that time, we had a free press, an honest press, led by Joseph Pulitzer, the guy who started the Pulitzer Prize. And he knew what the real deal was, and he called them the money trust and went after them tooth and nail. And so J.P. Morgan knew that and eventually legislation would come forth that would do some kind of damage to his ability to control the economy this way. And so they decided to try to get out ahead of the curve and write their own legislation so that could be proposed in Congress, and maybe that would mollify the public resentment, the public outrage. And so they decided that they would gather in secret at Jekyll Island down off the coast of Georgia. It was a remote island. There were no roads there. You had to take the train down to Brunswick, Georgia, and then take a boat over to Jekyll Island. And the reason it had to be secret was if the public or Joe Pulitzer got wind that the bankers were gathering at Jekyll Island to write a bill that would then be proposed in Congress, well, he'd trumpet it from the front page. And so it had to be a very secretive operation. They met, they designed around Thanksgiving in 1907, or 1910, I'm sorry.
Right.
And got their legislation together, went back to Washington. Their lead legislator was a guy by the name of Senator Nelson Aldrich, and he was a very egotistical guy, and so he named the bill the Aldrich Bill. And so, then Pulitzer got on it because he realized this was a banker's bill, and so it didn't pass the first time. And so they took it back in, and then they changed the name, called it the Federal Reserve System, made it appear that the money power was decentralized through 12 regional banks and all this, but we now know that the power was really completely centralized in the New York Fed. And, but, They waited until the Christmas recess, where many congressmen and senators had gone home, and they got it through on December 23rd of 1913. So this December 23rd, 1913, is the 100th anniversary of this scam, and my film Jekyll Island details just how it was done. And the film was created with an idea of making the most effective political tool possible, so that you can show it to your friends, you can get it on your local cable access channels, and see what we can do. Try to collect we're going to shoot for 1 million petition signatures before the December 23rd anniversary, and try to make something happen. If nothing else, raise awareness by, an order of magnitude.
An absolute incredible film. Mr. Still, you tell me where to sign, and I will be one of the first to sign that petition. Now, Mr. Still, can you please tell our listening audience about the history of tally sticks of England and Abraham Lincoln's greenbacks?
Yeah, sure. The tally sticks were, the thing I do in the film is I just show that this is the same ripoff time and time again over the centuries down throughout history. Namely, back in 1100 A.D. in early medieval England, the goldsmiths had a corner on money because it was basically a gold-based economy. And so they discovered that two things. Number one, that when people brought their gold into the goldsmiths' vaults, because they were the people in town who had a secure location you could keep your gold. They brought them in. They would give people paper receipts for their gold. And they found out just over the years that only about 10% of the population actually wanted to come back in and redeem their receipt and take physical possession of the gold. So they started cheating. They started issuing more receipts, counterfeit receipts, than they actually had gold. And this worked out fine. Occasionally, there'd be a run on the goldsmith's gold, and it would be discovered that he didn't have enough gold, and so they'd hang the goldsmith, and, then it would take a few years for the scam to start over again. But the goldsmiths discovered that by acting in concert, they could control the entire economy of a nation if they did the same thing at the same time. And so all they had to do to cause a depression, for example, was to not give out, they would start loaning money on their paper receipts, they would quit loaning money, and they would call in their previous loans. And if they did this nationwide, it would cause an instant depression. And then they could essentially blackmail the king and say, look, either do what we want, or else we can cause this depression. We'll demonstrate it to you if you really want, but if you just believe us and do what we say, then things would go well for you. Because the public would never catch on that, the depression was a deliberate contrivance of the goldsmith. The public would always blame the sovereign, the king.
Right.
And so King Henry I, the son of William the Conqueror, decided he was going to put an end to this, so he started issuing something called tally sticks, which were just sticks of wood with 90-degree notches cut into the stick at a certain distance apart to denote the denomination. They didn't even use numbers because most of the population was illiterate. They just used the size of these notches to indicate the denomination. And so tally sticks worked very well, and what it in essence did was return the money power to the sovereign and allowed him to tell the goldsmiths to go take a hike when they tried to blackmail him, because now the king had his own money, tally sticks, which he could pump into the economy if the goldsmiths tried to kill the gold-backed money. And amazing. So that was a very good thing. It was tally sticks worked for 600 years. Finally, they were killed off when the Bank of England took over the money supply of England in 1694, and it took them a generation to retire all the tally sticks. And when they tried to burn them, and at one point the tally sticks got their revenge. They got so hot that it actually burned down the British Parliament building. So the British have a Parliament building that's only a little over 100 years old, just because of the revenge of the tally sticks.
Wow. Now, tell us about the greenbacks and how Abraham Lincoln believed in the U.S. currency being non-debt based as well.
Right. Well, Lincoln knew that, when Jackson killed the Second Bank of the United States, which was a debt-based operation, the only thing Jackson did wrong was he did not implement the correct solution. The correct solution would have been to do what Lincoln did 30 years later, which was to just issue government money. I mean, this problem is very simple to solve. I mean, it is the government's responsibility to control the money supply. So the government should just issue, not Bank of England, but English currency, French currency, German currency, Chinese currency, not issue it through their central bank, which always the trick with the central bank is they try to get the government borrowing money from them, right, or borrowing money from banks in general, and then they just go back to the old system before the tally sticks with the goldsmiths. They get the government indebted to them. The government soon becomes addicted to the borrowing, and then they're cooked because the borrower inevitably becomes servant to the lender. And it's an old biblical proverb that's just as true today as it was the day it was written. And so that's what you have to get out of. You have to get out of the system. That's step one. You have to forbid government borrowing, not pay down the debt, not talk about it slowing down the increase in national debt. You've just got to stop it. You've got to make it illegal in every nation on this planet. Every nation on this planet borrows money, and they borrow money primarily from banks. So by definition, we have what political science calls a plutocracy, which is ruled by the rich, ruled by the banks. And that's what the problem is. They're now getting every government to just shovel money to them. And this is money that we have to create by our labor. And it's just not a fair system, and eventually it's going to collapse. And we're going to, what I predict is going to happen is they're going to try to implement a gold-backed international currency, saying that this is the only thing that could create monetary stability. Well, we were on a gold-backed currency at the time of the passage of the Federal Reserve Act. Just 16 years later, we had the bubble of the Roaring '20s. That's what the Roaring '20s meant. It meant that the banks were pumping out so much money that it caused a huge bubble, and that eventually collapsed. It collapsed into the Great Depression of the 1930s. So that's hardly monetary stability. We were on a gold-backed currency since Lincoln's assassination, and there was nothing but a series of booms and busts, financial panics. You just can't have it that way. The stability, economic stability, always favors the middle class. It favors small business. It favors the little people. Economic volatility and turmoil never favors the cause of freedom, never favors democracy, never favors the 99%. It only favors the banker class because they get out of ahead of the curve. They know when the crash is coming, and they profit from it. Not only that, but they profit from it by all the rest of us going bankrupt, and they get to foreclose on all of our assets. That's exactly what happened in 2008. It's exactly what's going to happen once again later this year when we're only 5 years down the road from 2008, and we haven't learned our lesson. We're still believing the bankers' lies that everything's going to go up forever, and it's not.
Wow. You're absolutely right, and that proverb you stated in the film and you talked about right now, which it means the rich rules over the poor and the borrower is the slave to the lender. That couldn't be any more true. And as a libertarian presidential candidate, I mean, you vowed to get rid of government borrowing and abolish the IRS. I mean, so you're definitely a premier candidate, somebody that we need out there at the forefront of this movement. And it's just absolutely wonderful to have you on. Now, before we wrap up, Mr. Still, tell our listening audience about some of your most noted followers, such as Milton Friedman, who have praised you for your Reform Act.
Right. Well, I called Friedman with the first cut of the Money Masters because I wanted to have I wasn't afraid of criticism of professors of economics. I mean, I've been a reporter all my life. I know what I'm doing, and so I know where you get support from academia. I know how to do it. You call the university press office and you tell them what's up and you need to speak to a professor. And sure enough, Milton Friedman called me back. I sent him, overnighted him on a Friday, the first cut of the Money Masters. He watched it over the weekend. Called me back, and I'll never get the first words out of his mouth. He went, "Boy, if you kill the Fed and don't do anything about fractional reserve lending, you've done nothing." And that's exactly true. And that's why the whole mantra of end the Fed does not cut it in my world. Right. Ending the Fed would do absolutely nothing. You have to end the ability, number one, of governments to borrow, and number two, of banks to practice fractional reserve lending. You have to end the ability of banks to control the economy. You have to put that back in the hands of we the people in some fashion.
Absolutely, and this fractional reserve lending goes all the way back to the Ashmeyer Rothschild days. I mean, this is something that has been going on for too long in my book, and we definitely need to nip it in the bud and wake up now. I mean, Mr. Still, we have people like Alan Greenspan who have openly stated that the Federal Reserve is a private-owned entity which is above the law. He stated the Federal Reserve is above the law. How can we continue to let these cronies get away with this treason?
Well, we can't. So that's why I point out in the film that there's really only two choices. You either have to have the rule of law, or you will have to suffer from the law of the jungle. And nobody in your listening audience, certainly that has children, would want their family to have to return to the law of the jungle. That's what's so precious about the American experiment in freedom. And we're going to lose it if we don't focus on what the real problem is. Job number one is to end the ability of the federal government to borrow, because they borrow primarily from banks, and that puts banks in control of Congress and guarantees no correct legislation, no effective legislation will ever come out of Congress to fix this problem. That's job one. That's why my mantra, instead of end the Fed, is no more national debt. I think that's what we should chant from the streets.
Absolutely, and I love your book, No More National Debt. Mr. Still, thank you very much for this exclusive interview.